This is Gabriel, custodian of Watchman Privacy. I know why you're here. You're looking to escape the technocratic apparatuses that you see slowly enveloping you and restraining your freedom. For the fundamentals of privacy, you should start by visiting escapethetechnocracy.com to see my video tutorials, books, and other resources for getting off the surveillance grid. Watchman Privacy and Escape the Technocracy are leading the fight for privacy, and unlike just about any other show, we practice what we preach. Private payment options, no threat modeling, no statist or collectivist solutions, and no sponsors, ever. You know what that means? It means we can speak the unmitigated truth as we see it. Your support alone determines the future of this show. Go support you and me at escapethetechnocracy.com. The date is September 13th, 2005. For most of us, this was any other day. A late summer, sleepy day where you may have been picking up your latte at Starbucks, going to work. A lot of you may have been at school. On the west coast of the United States, however, something else was happening that would affect millions across the world and lead to immense suffering in the upcoming days. In Irvine, California, a company had become the unknown creator of a yet-to-be-determined disease, and no doubt they were under immense pressure at this moment. You can imagine the sweaty palms, the sweat thickening on the keyboards and the mouses, the panic that was palpable. The internal network of the company became the prime vector of a disease that was starting to spread across the world. This company would later be contacted by a 3-letter agency about their involvement in this incident. What would play out in the upcoming days was one of the most fascinating and unparalleled experiments in human behavior ever conducted. In the moment, though, the apocalypse was surely nigh. One survivor reflects back on what happened on this day. I remember this so clearly, the corpses littering Duratar all the way to Thunder Bluff and Undercity. Death was everywhere, except the wilderness. Luckily, I was maxed out and tried to help out as much as I could. Chaos began to spread across the world. Another person reflecting on these days says, "The thing I remember most clearly, though, were the naked lunatics running around the city, trying their hardest to spread the debuff to as many people as possible." Unless you were logged in, looking at a computer screen, you may have not known that this was happening. This is the unbelievable story of a virtual plague, the corrupted blood incident. I'm Gabriel Custodiet. Welcome to Watchman Torchlight Chats. This is a special mini-series on video games and their unexpected influence on the world. Today we're discussing the corrupted blood incident in World of Warcraft. I'm joined as always by my friend Irvine, who knows something about video games, seeing as he is a video game developer himself. Irvine, we're talking today about a virtual plague that confused and ravaged an entire player base of millions of people on World of Warcraft. It influenced history, it probably saved real-world lives, and it got its creator, Blizzard Entertainment, an actual, quite real audience with the Center for Disease Control later on. So we're going to be discussing this event, going into some of the details. You're definitely going to want to stick around for this. It's important as we set the scene here, Irvine, to talk about the mid-2000s. This was the peak, in some sense, of MMOs. MMOs are massive multiplayer online games where people collaborate, they come together, they invest a lot of their life into creating these characters, going on quests, going into dungeons, and basically leveling up their character. So maybe you could help us to understand this culture a little bit. Even if you haven't played many MMOs yourself, Irvine, I'm sure you know how important these characters, these worlds are to the people who play them. What is the culture like of MMOs, and why was this incident, right, this moment in time, such a perfect environment for this fascinating virtual plague to happen?
There were many attempts to have online multiplayer, and of course you had the early Quake and Unreal tournament that enabled people to fight each other in a first-person view, and later on, more and more games. World of Warcraft was probably the first. It's not technically the first. There were other prototypes and attempts before, but it was the first one that was massively successful in 3D, that was like a bit not just for geeks, but you had like just many people playing it. There was like a whole culture, like a whole subculture around this game, not just fighting, but you had like all sorts of interactions. Like you could do trading if you wanted, you could do hunting, wild animals. You could do really whatever you want. And now you have so many games that enable you to do that. But at the time, being able to play with your friends, that was something. Another interesting aspect of it is it was not yet the time of microtransaction and free to play but expensive to win. So yes, it was a paid game and you had to pay $10 or whatever the price was in those days, play it every month. But it kind of acted as a filter, because you knew that people who paid it, they were really motivated and they would use real money, so they would be like motivated and invested in their character.
Absolutely. And so you had a lot of motivated, highly invested people who were part of these worlds. And so when this plague that we're going to explain happened and it started killing everyone, this became a serious event. People reacting in some cases in real world ways that showed a fascinating experiment in, let's say, behavior to a disease. By the way, I'd recommend people track down for a little bit more knowledge of this particular subculture, track down this South Park episode called Make Love, Not Warcraft. That's a great one. And Urban, one of the players at the time, somebody reflecting back on this moment says that, quote, "It was so fascinating to see how people reacted to the outbreak, the real life methods people took to deal with it, some running and living in quarantine, some trying to help, some being malicious." So this became a fascinating experiment of human reaction. So let's start with explaining the origins of this disease. Like most diseases, it started from some powerful creator. It started with a group of people adventuring to some far corner of some far off land, right? A place that most people are not supposed to be. And this was exactly the case in World of Warcraft. A new dungeon had been introduced and high-level characters were going to fight the boss of this dungeon. Now, Blizzard, the company, Blizzard Entertainment, in its infinite wisdom, right? Do you guys not have phones? Decided to create a special debuff, which is a damaging attribute to the character, so it damages your character. They decided to create this debuff that was a very serious debuff, very harsh, but it was designed to attack high-level characters. Now, after they fight this boss and defeat this boss, when they leave, it was supposed to be cured. They were supposed to be cured of this disease that otherwise did not have a cure, right? Blizzard thought everybody will be cured once they leave the zone. We're not even going to introduce a cure into the game. So that's what they set up. That was the ground zero. That was the setup. But Urban, they forgot one thing, didn't they?
When they released the patch, they forgot that pets that were carried by the player and that were in the inventory of the player could also get it. So in a typical fight, people might, rotate among their pets to find a better companion to fight this adversary. They might get corrupted blood, and then they would just switch it to another one, not really realizing that they would keep the debuff, let's call it disease from now on. It's just easier for people to follow. So they would get this corrupted blood attribute still with them, and when they went out of the dungeon, it would cure everybody, right? Except the one in the inventory, because it's not technically active, right? It's just in a database. This was the original bug. And the other thing that you have to take into account in that regard is there was no cure, as you said. And also, this was thought initially to be isolated to only one specific, not only you had to be in the dungeon, but you had to be in the server, in the correct place, in the correct dungeon to get it. But once it reached the inventory of the player, the inventory is basically your backpack in a game. So it must be available everywhere, no matter the server, no matter the dungeon, no matter the city, you always have access to the inventory. It's one of the most common things in video game. And I like to imagine what happens if you have an infected animal in your inventory and then you leave this place.
Yes. So suddenly you now have these pets that are being taken out of this area, and they are the unknowing carriers of this corrupted blood disease. So from the start, people are not exactly sure what's happening. After a few hours, though, the results become inevitable. As one person remembers, "Oh, I remember this event quite well. Total fucking chaos that was. People who didn't know what was happening kept running around all confused and panicked in an attempt to get away from it, thereby unintentionally making it worse because they caused the spread to reach even further." So this is a highly contagious disease that starts spreading from character to character, and nobody is exactly sure what's happening. Most of these people have never even been to this dungeon, right? And because this was meant for such high level characters, this disease does a lot of damage to the average person. So players start getting hit with these massive attacks, and they have no clue where they're coming from. Confused messages littered the screen. Watching a video of the event, one character is seen saying, "Who is attacking me?" The confusion continued with no clear answers. One player from this video is seen saying, "The end is near." So people start to respond in the only way they really know how. They try to heal themselves. This is what one player says of the event. "We formed healing circles and helped shield noobs while spamming area of effect healing spells and chugging mana potions as fast as the alchemist could make them. The real MVPs, though, were the tanks who went into the towns to do recon and try to figure out what was happening, as we were in the dark for the first day or so. I actually pocketed a tank on one of these recon missions, and seeing all the dead player models was disturbing. I've seen some in my time in World of Warcraft, but this was just unsettling." So the disease starts to spread, Urban, and people really have no clue what's going on. And they really shouldn't have a clue, because this is some random debuff from some far off place that has just been introduced into the game. And one of the main vectors for the transmission of this was an unlikely type of character. Tell us about one of the main ways that this was transmitted, Urban.
Yeah, so you have mechanics of merchant and auction where you can go in marketplace in the cities and you can buy and sell and trade and do things. So you would have, an unwilling participant, like unaware, that would then infect the NPCs. Because again, this could spread to anyone, the animals, the character, the NPC, basically like anything alive on screen could be a carrier of the disease. Now, the people who created this, they never intended it to infect NPCs. So they had no symptoms, They are just, marked as infected. So what would happen is, you would have some guy going into an auction, approaching the merchant, infecting the merchant. And now the merchant is like an asymptomatic spreader where everybody who goes to buy and sell things is now potentially infected. So even if you try to, carry on with your normal life and say, okay, I just ignore all of this, I'm going to just go in a city and trade, you would still contribute to the spread of the disease through this way.
So as these NPCs help to spread the plague, it continues to spread across all of the servers. People had a number of reactions. Some people, as we've said, tried to set up healing stations. They would even go out and heal others, where they would sometimes contract the disease themselves. Others continued on as usual, as if nothing was happening. They simply needed to level up, to earn money, to do all the things that they needed to do, and they were willing to risk everything just to make ends meet. Others tried to flag themselves as infected so people would stay away, thus having a little bit of social responsibility, knowing that getting close to a character or having a character get close to them would lead to this devastating disease. Others abused this kind of flag. Yet others fled for the hills, tracking down the least populated areas so that they could wait out the end of the world. Eventually, the company of Blizzard Entertainment caught on. Quote, "I remember Blizzard instituted a voluntary quarantine zone to help their players prevent the virulent disease from disrupting their gameplay in such a spectacular way. But it failed miserably because too many players didn't take it seriously or intentionally chose to keep spreading the plague because that was more fun." Some guy who worked for Blizzard went as far as to call these players virtual terrorists. Urban, what do you think is the responsibility of a video game company, who is at the center of this really important game where even the currency of World of Warcraft is used in real life, and all of these characters and their abilities and their the time they've invested has real world consequences. What should Blizzard have done in a situation like this? Should they just have reset the game? What would that have caused? How should Blizzard have responded to this disease?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. Now, allow me to be a bit controversial. The first objective of a video game is to entertain. And I think people were mostly entertained during that event. This was like quite unique and unusual, one could say. So, in my opinion, that's, all good. It's a game. But in more seriousness, it's not as easy as to reset, because at the time they didn't understood yet the scale at which this was spreading. They still thought that this was only on the server of the dungeon, and they didn't believe that it could spread to other server, as we said, but with the inventory being this thing that is always available to the player, this is how it spread to all the other server, and then it just became global. So that's one. Initially, they reacted that, okay, this is kind of interesting. We have quarantine that didn't really work. And they were increasingly trying to prevent it. But imagine the scale that, you have millions of players. They are playing every day, millions of inventory, potentially billions of items. How do you go through all the items from all the inventory, from all the players to make sure there is no corrupted blood? That's a monumental task. And also when you're under such pressure, the likelihood that you put more bugs and that you don't fix things or you make things worse is also exponentially higher because everybody is stressed and panicked. I think at some point they just hard-coded that every time you invoke a pet, that it would check if it has corrupted blood, and if it has, then it just removes it. But again, that doesn't address the problem of the NPC spreading it and the wild animals and the nature. Now, about their social responsibility, this is harder to say. It's a bit of a philosophical answer. But I think, it all depends on the situation that you have and the likely damage that is going on. But if we go for the reset, I just want to show why this is not easy. Imagine, now you bought some gold or some new character and you bought it and you spent real money. And now suddenly the server is reset, but you already bought, you already spent the money, but now you have a double spend. It's I know your audience, Gabriel, they are familiar with Bitcoin and crypto. This is as if you were removing Bitcoin blocks, right? What happened to the merchant that accepted the block that were mined? It's kind of the same in a video game. What happened to all the trades and all the stuff that people did? So it's not as easy as to just take a backup of the world and reset it. It can have financial consequence in all sorts of ways.
Clearly, the top-down solution was not an option. Not only was it technologically infeasible, but it would also affect, as Irvine said, the real-world efforts that all these individual people had put into their items and their quests and their character. Human nature would have to take its pound of flesh. We then get to the group of people who might best be described as the evil ones. Players, realizing that they had nothing to lose in a virtual game after all, started to spread the disease. As one person remembers of those fateful days, the trolls were the fucking worst though, harassing tanks and their medics while they were trying to do recon or dissenting on healing circles and messing up everything. The troll situation got so bad that the Alliance and the Horde put their differences aside and formed troll hunting parties, with their main goal being to trap trolls individually so they couldn't keep reinfecting each other. After the hard reset, we were all cautious, but things got back to normal slowly over time, and the war between the Alliance and the Horde started once more. This player's talking about the Alliance, the humans, and the Horde is the orcs, two factions that are typically at war with each other, bonded together in this moment to fight off the trolls who were responsible for spreading this disease. Another person commenting on this incident said, "There were many incidents during the corrupted blood plague of what can only be described as bioterrorism. Some high-level players with more wicked intent, ranging from just trying to spread mischief without realizing the full extent of the plague, to those who were actively, maliciously trying to do evil, would deliberately rush their way to the final boss and intentionally infect either themselves or their pets, warping back to the cities before they died and spreading the plague as much as they could in the limited time they had. The worst victims of this sort of griefing were new players, who were, and still are, often bullied by more experienced players. These incidents of players deliberately spreading the plague have also been noticed by researchers and noted in some articles. Sometimes, if someone knows they're going to die, they have nothing left to lose and will just want to see the world burn. Urban, these alliances began to form. People start to collectivize and form their own groups to repel this plague and to attack these griefers. Talk to us a little bit about how these factions work in MMOs and maybe even what you may have been tempted to do in this situation.
Some people take video games very, very seriously. Like, those MMO can be highly competitive. And in a future episode that we are preparing, we are going to discuss on some of like wars and alliance that can go on in those games. But for some people, they invested real money in their character. They play it every day, right? And then suddenly they realize that they might need to get out to see the sunset instead of playing World of Warcraft on their computer. And naturally, they are not very happy about the prospect of going out and touching grass. So you have all sorts of behavior. It's not surprising to see alliance forming and like over this, because like that happened in real life as well. When you have a common enemy, you put temporarily your difference aside and you deal with the problem. And then when the problem is over, then the old grievances and resurface. You see, it's like a small war in the digital realm. You have forums. Often those forums, they are like highly protected and highly secret about every different type of guilds and alliance that you find in those games. And then if you're from one alliance, you cannot access the forum of the other one, etc. And they are used to like collaborate with things like raiding others, plundering the city of the enemy, those type of stuff, things that you see in real warfare. This is well, but it's actually not that surprising, in a case. Now, yeah, the real victim about being the noobs, I feel sorry for them. Like, life is hard, and this was maybe not the best day to start World of Warcraft. Now, in the end, as you said, Blizzard decided to just hard reset everything and just roll back to like a few days before. But yeah, it was certainly not easy at all for beginners. And often starting in those games can be daunting because you have, the veteran player that they have been there since the beginning, and, they know their ropes, they have their very powerful character. And there is a bit of, harassment going on and bullying. But I will say in general, not for that episode, but in general, that's also like a ritual to see if you're worth it and if you're serious about, staying inside and playing games instead of going out. So there is a bit of a ritualistic aspect to it. And I have some experience, not in World of Warcraft, but I have some experience into some of the most hardcore video games and hardcore server that you wouldn't believe exist. And we are going to discuss this also in another episode about the video game series. And I was definitely bullied and, harassed and killed and grifted and, all my stuff were stolen. But you stick around and you continue, and eventually you become good and, other people respect you. But, it's also a bit how real life works. You cannot ask other people to respect. There is in a certain way, you need also to earn it. You cannot expect other people to just respect you, else you're gonna delude yourself.
Now, soon the masses would have their vengeance, realizing that in this chaos, if everything is permitted, if there are no rules anymore, and if human life is this cheap, what if they turned the tables and became the aggressors themselves? There's a film called Outbreak, famous film about a disease. And what happens in that film is this is a highly contagious disease. It ends up in the United States, and there's an entire town that gets sick. And so, of course, what the U.S. military does is they quarantine this entire zone. And towards the end of the film, the decision is made to bomb all of these people, to wipe them out completely. An easy utilitarian decision, right? We kill some to spare many. And this is how a lot of disease planning works. It really will come down to that at the end. So this also happens in the corrupted blood incident. Somebody in the YouTube comments of the videos of this plague says, one of the things you didn't mention was how there were groups of people going around as effectively hit squads, killing anyone with the corrupted blood. So imagine you're in one of these alliances and you're tired of this plague that is taking over and all these people running wild. Well, they decided to take it to the enemy and they went out and killed any character who had the plague. Didn't matter if that person was begging for their life, whatever. It doesn't matter if they were minding their own business, they would kill them. One thinks of, for example, during the plague of a few years ago, those who died from choosing to go into public was one thing, but the real coercion was when you shut down the borders, when the police state arose, when cowardly pastors, following mandates to shut down churches, destroyed a lot of the people in their communities. One thinks of the small businesses that were coerced into shutting down and going out of business, destroying those people's lives and the people who relied on them. I still remember the story of this old lady, I think it was Australia, who was accosted by police for sitting on a park bench against the quarantine rules. The coercion from people who live for the greater good is the greatest coercion of all. And let's not forget, as long as we're talking about coercion, that the entire creator of this entire disease was Blizzard themselves. Irvine, what did these events in Corrupted Blood reveal to you about human nature?
Yeah, we are messy as a species. It's not surprising because if you read ancient text about what happened during plagues and stuff, you also had, plague hunter, like going and, killing the one infected, like that happened. Or maybe not killing them, but like, kicking them out of the city and having them like die slowly outside without any help. It's also very realistic in the sense that nobody knew what was happening. The fact, like, if you know it's a virus and you know kind of like how to avoid it, it's one thing. But if it's completely unknown and it's completely new, that's another thing. And we have seen in recent events that sadly we cannot still speak on like openly on certain platform for podcasts, but I think everybody sees the parallels with the real life, is that all sorts of weird and like you see all the gamut of the human behavior, from the best to the worst and all in between. There is, however, one giant difference between World of Warcraft and the real life. And actually, this made it worse, ironically, is that people are invincible. I mean, yeah, sure, they can, quote unquote, die, but they never really die, They might lose their inventory and items, and they might lose, some experience points or whatever, but they will respawn and they will start again. And because there was no cure and there was no immunity, it also made that every time you would, quote unquote, die, you could just respawn and get infected all over again. And this made that effectively the disease could not stop, and I think this is why Blizzard decided in the end to just reset everything. Because in real life, either you will gain immunity, and this is the majority of people, or you might pass away. And this is thankfully or hopefully, let's hope it's a minority. But in a game where you cannot really die and you will endlessly respawn, then you are trapped, into like a bad Greek legend in which you're forced in like the Groundhog Day to live over and over and to be killed again and again and to relive this forever. So yeah, so it could basically spread to infinity and just make the game really, really not that interesting to play after a few days. This is a bit like where the comparison to the real world is breaking down.
And because people have invested so much time into this game, they did react in some way, somewhat realistically, right? Whether they were fleeing or fighting or trying to preserve the life of their character for as long as they can so they don't have to respawn and lose certain things along the way. So it became ultimately a situation that was studied by disease control and disease prevention agencies. There have been articles written on it. There have been people who have tried to study the real world behavior of millions of players who are involved in a virtual pandemic. Blizzard, as we said, was trying to do what they could. They tried to do these regular resets on particular servers on a rolling basis, but then the corrupted blood outbreaks would reemerge, and so they were forced in the end to do a hard reset of the game before the events. This would have been a serious endeavor, not something to be taken lightly. There was one level-headed WoW player who understood what Blizzard was going through. Here's what he says: Blizzard got slammed hard for the way they dealt with the problem. They forced a shutdown and a hard reset to take care of the problem, and they were criticized for it. What else were they supposed to do, though? None of the main hubs were usable. People deliberately chose not to follow Blizzard's player-friendly approach to deal with the situation, so Blizzard did what they had to do to take care of business. There's always going to be some assholes you can't just do right by and who just want to be assholes. And I'll conclude for this person who probably need to be destroyed or coerced. So as a result of this somewhat fun incident, you could say, Urban, it seems that no situations like this have necessarily happened again, certainly in WoW. Blizzard would patch in that the pets are immune to contracting the corrupted blood. In my experience, there's not quite anything that has been like this. In fact, we might even say that everything has become rather safe and boring in massive online games.
I was watching the other day a YouTube video about the most extreme society on Earth, and they were talking about, some anarchy in, after the war in the Balkans and that type of stuff. And then they said one about our own society, which is safetyism, and like we are so extreme on everything must be super safe and nobody can be hurt, even in a virtual world. I mean, think how crazy is that? Like, ponder for a moment. Like, we are even trying to prevent disease in virtual games. Yeah, it's part of this push that everything must be sanitized. Nowadays, when you roll up something like a video game patch, you have people testing it. You have entire simulation being done to make sure that you try most probable possibilities, and you have like all sorts of safety in place. And in one way, you could say that it adds to the quality of the software. On the other side, there is a lot of those unexpected moments that might really, with time, I'm sure if you lived through it and you had a powerful character and you got decimated by a corrupted blood, this was not fun. But probably most people who lived through it, now when they look back at it, they have this fun memory, and it's like it's a unique event that never happened again. I give another example. In Civilization, which is a strategy game, it's not a multiplayer game, but the thing are the same. You have to manage your country, and you can use weapons and diplomacy and war to try to conquer and expand your empire. Now, in that game, there was a bug where Gandhi is, like in real life, a most peaceful character, and if he's the ruler of India, he is the most peaceful. And in the game, there was a counter to see how aggressive and how peaceful you are. And if you were at 255, you were extremely peaceful, which Gandhi was. Now, what happened is, in that instance, as India was evolving, Gandhi would become even more peaceful, and you would add one to the counter. And for the geek out there, that when you add one to a counter that reach the end, in that case, it was, maximum 255, then it goes back to zero. Just like, when you arrive to 999 and you add one, then you go back to 000, because there is, you cannot carry over. There is a limitation. Effectively, this made Gandhi to be the most aggressive and ruthless leader that would totally build nuclear weapon to try to destroy you. And it's a fun bug. People just loved it. It was totally unexpected, And nowadays it would be patched, it would be, we fixed this problem. But it's actually very funny, it's a fun way to, it's unexpected. And this what makes human life interesting, not, a completely sanitized version. Now, again, there are games that use this and push this type of, unexpectedness to a whole new level.
And so the audience, you're going to have to stick around. Please share this episode if you like it. We need your help to break some of the shadow banning that we're getting. We need you, please, when you see this, retweet it. Share it with 5 people. Pause right now and share with 5 people. And expect in our next episode to talk about a cult classic video game, one that went so far in the opposite direction of Blizzard and the cult of safety that its motto would become losing is fun. We'll see you on the other side. Hey, thanks for listening. Look, I could use your help real quick. If you could share this, engage with me in some way, leave a review anywhere. This really helps me to break the technocratic shadow banning that is happening with my brand. And of course, if you really want to escape the technocracy, go to escapethetechnocracy.com. Privacy tutorial series, books, consulting, and of course, you can leave a donation. Thank you very much.